So I thought I'd try to narrow it down to one part of medical writing, which would be preparing a manuscript. I hope that's helpful. I think most of you write and publish. So we're working off of AMA style, which is typically what most journals use. Some use APA, but I'm not going to get into that. And I apologize if some of this is trivial information. I'm not exactly sure what you all know, but we keep it kind of casual, so if you have any questions during, just interrupt me. That's fine. So these are the things that I was going to kind of go over, just the different parts of a manuscript. So this would be after you've already done your research and you're sitting down to write, and you already know what journal you're going to target and submit to. Okay, so we will, so you have a manuscript, you know, it might be like 5,000 words, and you need to write a title. So it should be concise and specific and informative. You should avoid overly general titles, so things like cocaine use and homicide, and I feel like that's probably just good life advice. You should probably avoid cocaine use and homicide. But better would be cocaine use and homicide among men in New York City, because it's just more specific. And I highlighted among because we'll just throw in there, you know, some general grammar things that people sometimes confuse. Yeah, so among would be a choice among several different things, and between is a choice, you know, between two things, unless you are talking about things individually. You would use between. So she chose between Harvard, Yale, and Princeton, but she chose among the Ivy League schools, so there's a difference there. We see this a lot. Role of, effects of, treatment of, those can usually be omitted unless you're talking about a clinical trial. It's just more direct to say something like smoking and lung cancer than the effect of, because it's kind of implied that we'll be talking about the effect of. Oh yeah, so effect and effect. Most of the time, effect is a verb and effect is a noun. So that's, if you remember that, that can usually help you decide which one to use. Yeah, effect is a verb, but it means to have an influence on, and effect is a noun. Effect is a noun, just means the result. The cartoon was from Grammar Girl, which is a helpful website that I use sometimes. Subtitles, people use them a lot. You should maybe try to avoid them if you can. The main title, if you do use them, the main title should be able to stand alone. You can, and then the key elements of the study should not be given in the subtitle. So you can, so you should avoid things like psychiatric disorders, because it's just way too general. So you would say something like rural urban differences in the prevalence. So we've highlighted that. These are two words that sometimes get confused. And yes.
Regarding titles, what do you think of the statement-like titles? A title that says what you want to say in the entire paper. CMV infection causes loss of hearing.
If you're making a firm statement like that, it should definitely be what is being said in the paper, because it's kind of an imperative statement. I mean, it's typically okay to make a firm statement like that, as long as you're proving that that's what is actually happening.
Although
So.
I might not read that paper, because you just told me what the answer is. So there's a CMV and the effect on hearing. I might read that paper.
You a lot of time.
Yes, you said.
So yeah, that's okay as long as you are proving that is actually what is happening. Yeah, incidence and prevalence are sometimes used interchangeably, but there is a difference. incidence is a number of new cases among people at risk over time, and the prevalence is the total number of people with a certain disease at any given time.
Do prevalence ever use numbers like you did in the incidence thing?
Yes, yeah, as long as it's the total number of people. So, I'm trying to think. There's a high prevalence of hepatitis B users, and so then you might say, comma, and then give a general number. I mean, you wouldn't know specifically if it's a prevalence. It's, but yes, you can use a number. So these are just quick tips. Avoid using questions unless it's an editorial or opinion piece. If you use quotation marks, use double quotes, and that is always, unless you are using a quote inside a quote. Use generic names of drugs unless you're being funded by the drug company, then don't. Avoid the use of abbreviations unless you're talking about a specific group that is known by its acronym. And capitalize the first letter of each major word. Do not capitalize articles, prepositions of 3 or fewer letters. Do capitalize 2-letter verbs. So these are confused sometimes. E.g. is, for example, that's kind of, if you can remember that, that will help. It is not an all-inclusive list. So I would say I love eating meat whose ingredients are mystery, bologna, hot dogs, and Spam. There are other meats whose ingredients are mystery. IE is an all-inclusive list. So when you use IE, everything that you say after that is exactly what you're talking about. So abstracts generally use the MRAD structure, but you would always, let me preface this first, always check the journal's instructions before you do any of these, because sometimes journals deviate from AMA rules. But introduction, methods, results, and discussion is typically what the abstract guidelines that you'll follow. So the introduction obviously is why did you do the study, methods, when, where, and how, results, what did the study find, and the discussion or the conclusion. Conclusion is what a lot of journals use instead of discussion. And most abstracts are typically 250 words for structured abstracts. So this is from the Journal of Graduate Medical Education, and that's their style. So background and objective they use, and methods instead, but they're all pretty much, they're similar. So unstructured abstracts would contain the same information, but it's just not broken down into sections, and they are typically 150 words, but clinical translational science uses 200 words. So again, that's just something you would have to check with the journal. And unstructured abstracts are used for things, sometimes for like reviews, more less scientific. So always, like I said, always consult the journal's instructions. Don't cite references in abstracts. Include major terms and describe databases, because abstracts can be searched in retrieval systems like PubMed. So include your hypothesis, spell out abbreviations on first mention. With abbreviations, if you only use it once, you don't put the abbreviation in the paper. So you would just completely nix it. Provide the dates of the study. And the last one, verify the numbers provided in the abstract against the numbers in the text and tables. I actually see that a lot. And I think maybe because abstracts are in the methods and results are usually written first. And then people will go and do the tables, and sometimes things change depending on how they've, but that is actually seen a lot, so make sure to double check the numbers.
If you spell out an abbreviation in the abstract, should you do it again in the body of the manuscript the first time you use it, or should you just leave it unabbreviated in the abstract? That's your recommendation.
Yeah, you don't abbreviate anything in the abstract. I mean, if you use it more than once, you can, but don't abbreviate anything. And in the paper, you always spell out, even if you've abbreviated in the abstract, still spell it out in the text.
Okay.
So the organization, the introduction, you typically try to keep it short, 2 to 3 paragraphs. Provides context, objectives, and hypothesis. The methods. The methods and the results, even when you're completely tapped out, you can always sit down and write the methods and the results, because if you've already done the research, they basically write themselves. They don't change. So if you're having a hard time writing, you can get those done and then feel like you've written a lot of the paper. So the methods would contain the study design, the IRB approval. If your research required IRB approval, a lot of journals will require that you submit the actual approval from the IRB, and you should mention it that you did get approval. Inclusion and exclusion on criteria, statistical analysis, and enough information should be provided to enable replication of the study. So if you've, certain things, if you've done a study with a group of people and you've handed out surveys or quizzes or things, sometimes you should include those as like an appendix, so that just so the study can be replicated and everything is. So I'm sorry, there's a lot of information on these 2 slides. I know that's a big no-no. The results, again, those are things that just kind of write themselves, specific and relevant to the hypothesis. Don't include the weakness of the study in the results. You'll talk about that in the discussion. The data and tables and the figures should not be duplicated in text. So we see that quite a bit too. If somebody has, a lot of times people will put the results in the actual text, and then they'll also have a small table at the end. A lot of journals will take that table out because the information's already there and you don't really need it twice. It takes up more space. The discussion, this is where you discuss if there were any weaknesses, any unexpected findings. You should compare and contrast with other studies that you've researched. This is something that's is a lot of times subjective to journals as well. The levels of headings, you should just use consistent style. Unless the journal tells you, just make sure that you're consistent. You should distinguish between primary and secondary headings by either using font size, underlining, bolding. The number of headings, there's no predetermined number, but there should at least be a minimum of 2, so at least like an introduction and a conclusion, if it's an unstructured. But a lot of times journals will limit how many levels of headings you can have. Sometimes I'll see papers that have 4 or 5 levels, and usually try to limit those to 2 or 3. The references, they should be numbered consecutively. Cite references and text tables and figures. Superscript, the references go outside of periods and commas and inside colons and semicolons. And there are no spaces. APA style does it a little different. They put the references in parentheses or brackets. I can't remember which one. So that is a difference. So this is just how references are structured for journals. I only included journals and books because those are the 2 types of references that I see the most. But references are different for I mean, there are dozens of different kinds of references, but this is typically how they're done. So you include the authors. There are no periods in between their initials. If there are 7 authors, then you only include the first 3 and then put et al. And that's how you would do it for print and online. You have to include the access date. So,
Can I ask you a question?
I got, sorry.
I think you answered the question by including it. I'm sorry.
Oh, now I don't know what happened.
Yeah.
Journals.
Yeah. So the number, Journal of Graduate Medical Education, the number in parentheses is
It's the issue number.
issue. Thank you.
Yeah, and sometimes,
Is that necessary?
if there is one, you should include it, but a lot of journals don't have issue numbers. And you should always use for the PubMed abbreviations for journals. So it's for the Journal of Graduate Medical Education. That's what it is. Don't ever spell them out completely unless they're things like.
Is there a place that is easy to get those abbreviations for the journal themselves?
NCBI and PubMed have them. Yeah, there's a list on PubMed, and some journals too. For the page numbers, you should always. So some journals will put 32-8, but you should include the inclusive page numbers, and there are no spaces between the date and the volume issue number.
What does access mean kind of online?
That's just when you looked at it.
Oh,
So, because sometimes websites will change or they'll go down. So if you put the date and then somebody else tries to look at it and it's not there anymore, it was there on this date, so that so people know that it was there then. It might not be there now. Mhm. Yeah.
When I do things like when I'm preparing a manuscript, I keep updating it until like the very last second that I submit, and I go back and make sure it's still there at the same URL, but then I put the most recent date. Is that the right thing to do, or does it not matter?
You should put the most recent date if that's when you've looked at it.
But is it a good idea to like do it one more
You don't
time
have
before you
to.
submit it?
No, I mean you don't have to. No.
I was worried that it's going to be gone. I don't know why. Maybe
I mean, if it's gone, that's why you have the access date. So I mean, it was there at one time, so it was there. But yeah, I mean, you don't have to go through and keep updating it. But if you do, yeah, I mean, you can. Yeah, so tables. This is another slide with a lot of information. I was just going to touch on these briefly. Title, column headings, row headings, data, and footnotes. You should avoid missing data fields. So you either use 0, an ellipses, or NA. It just looks weird when you have a missing one without any information in it. In the footnotes, you should use letters. I see a lot of people use symbols and things, but you should always use letters, A, B, C, depending on when they appear in the table. So that's an example. The table 1, 2, 3, that's always bolded, and then the title after. Abbreviations are pretty lax in tables. You can abbreviate things like standard deviation, confidence interval, number, patient, and you don't need to put a footnote for those. You don't need to spell them out. Oops. So talk a little bit about some grammar things. And again, I apologize if these are trivial, if this is trivial information. So pronoun-verb agreement. I was just trying to find things that I see sometimes confused. So pronouns that always take singular verbs, those each, either, neither. Sometimes people will use plural with those, but those are always singular. Pronouns that always take plural, several, few, both, many. And ones that could take either singular, you just use, it's depending on what it's referring to, is what you would use.
So give me an example of the last one. Some of the boys are
Right.
in the school.
Yeah, so because boys is plural, you would say are.
Some of the candy is given out at Halloween.
Right, yeah. Yeah, so just depending on what you're referring to. This, you all know what tense is, but I just wanted to point it out because sometimes they're used with, sometimes they get mixed up. People will use present and past together. Present tense and present perfect tense are okay to use together, and past tense and past perfect are okay to use together, but you should try to be consistent within the manuscript. We see these quite a bit. Common false singulars, so bacteria, criteria, phenomena, memoranda, those are actually plural, and I put the singular underneath them. I think they're just used so much that a lot of people will say things like bacteria is, and that's not correct.
What do you think about data?
It's plural. I mean, unless you're referring to one specific data point, then that would be singular, but data it's plural.
Use datum, which would be the singular form in Latin.
AMA style does not use that, no, but and actually I read this before, I read about this last week. They generally, it is generally plural unless you are referring to one specific, and then you would say data is, but no, they don't use the Latin form.
I've been editing a journal for 15 years, and I haven't seen more than a handful of times the use of data in plural.
Yeah, that does get, you mean incorrectly? Like people will say data is?
Data is.
Yeah, I find that a lot, and it kind of makes me cringe a little bit. Yeah.
I'm old, so I feel like I'm paying homage to my age.
Yeah. No, but no, I'm glad you brought that up. I didn't even put that in because, I mean, I guess, I don't know. I don't see that too often with the papers that I've edited here, but in the pharmacy journal, we saw that quite a bit. But yeah, but it's plural. Dashes, typically try to avoid these, which I actually have trouble with. I use the M dash quite a bit. AMA style says that you shouldn't. M dashes are used to indicate an interruption or break in thoughts. You should not use it when a comma or a semicolon or even just a period will work. N dashes do get used quite a bit in scientific journals. So when you have a word that's either a compound modifier or a hyphenated word, you would use an N dash after it to indicate that it is referring to everything that comes before or after, like non-small cell carcinoma.
Can I ask a silly question on that? Show my own ignorance. What's the difference between M dash and N dash? I've never heard this term.
An M dash is bigger.
Length?
Yeah. Yeah, it's longer. An N dash is in between. It's a little bit bigger than a hyphen. I don't know if this you can. Yeah, because clinician educator is a hyphenated word.
That's hyphen. So there's two different dashes in clinician?
Yes, there are. I know. Yes, this hyphen. Yeah, I know.
Type the hyphen twice to get an N dash, and you type it 3 times to get an M.
I use
Is that how you do it on the keyboard?
the insert. There's insert symbol because they're both on there, the M dash and the N dash. But yeah, this is actually smaller. That's a hyphen because clinician educator is a hyphenated word, but it's a clinician educator directed group, so that's an N dash.
I have another question. So sometimes when I'm confused about what is the correct thing to do, I try to rephrase the sentence so I don't have to have that conflict.
Right.
So would it be better if I didn't know in the first example, just to say age, severity of symptoms, and psychiatric preparation determine the patient's reaction?
Yeah, that's more direct, and it probably is better. This is just another way to say it, but you typically try to avoid M dashes if you can. So that would be a way to avoid it, to get around it. Like I said, you could put commas. You could even put them in parentheses. It could be a parent, all these factors. Oh no, not parentheses, but commas. You would use commas. So yeah, but yeah, try to avoid M dashes if something else will work. Okay. Semicolons. These are used to separate clauses that could stand alone as a sentence, or main clauses that are joined by a conjunctive adverb. So, however, therefore. This is a cartoon from the Oatmeal, which is a funny blog. But yeah, down here, this is an independent clause, but so a period would work there, but the two clauses are connected somehow. So a semicolon would work, so you don't have a full stop in the sentence. They're also used to separate sentences that have internal punctuation. So if you have too many commas, so say you have, therefore, and then you have an appositive that is enclosed in commas, sometimes you can use a semicolon because it just looks too confusing. And then to separate a list of items that contain commas. So Seattle, Washington, Tokyo, Japan, and London, England. Colons are different. They tried to throw in humor. They indicate a decided pause or break in thought, or separate two main clauses in which the second amplifies the first. So this dictum is often believed to be in the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm. And, I'm sorry?
I'm sorry. Can you go back there? You capitalize first, do not first, the word first. Why?
Well, it's a...
Would you use quotation marks or
No, because I mean you're introducing that this statement is believed to be in the Hippocratic Oath. It's not.
would it be incorrect to use lowercase first?
Yeah, it's because you're starting a full sentence. So I mean you're saying that this thing is believed to be in the Hippocratic Oath. So it would be incorrect to use a lowercase. It's a full sentence, and it's a separate statement from the actual sentence. If you were using a list, if a list came after that, which is next, I think. If you were using a list, so the following, then those would be lowercase unless it's a proper noun. And something that another thing that also makes me cringe, when people introduce a list and they don't say the following or as follows, sometimes I usually try to put those words in there just because if you're introducing a list, you should say that the list is following. I'll just go over a few confusing words.
So if you introduce a list after a colon, you put semicolons between all list items, right?
No, you only need the semicolons if there's commas with them.
Okay. Yeah, so if you had a series of something, I'm trying to think. But no, you would use commas unless there is a list of something after that already has commas in it. So if you would say I visited the following cities, Tokyo, Japan, comma, semicolon, because it'd be Tokyo, comma, Japan, semicolon. These are some words that are sometimes confused in scientific manuscripts. So abnormal, normal, negative, and positive. Those do not refer to patients. They lab tests and studies are not abnormal. So the throat culture was not negative. It was negative for beta hemolytic streptococci. And acute and chronic, they are preferred descriptions for symptoms, conditions, or diseases, and they do not refer to severity. So chronic dialysis, chronic care, acute administration, try to avoid those and use instead long-term dialysis, long-term care, and immediate administration. Age and aged. Aged is the adjective that you should use before when you designate a person's age. So, similar, school-aged and teenage are also preferred. Age is a noun, so trying to think of the school-aged children, so you would use that instead. Because of, caused by, due to, and owing to are not synonymous. Due to and caused by are adjectives, and owing to and because of are adverbs, adverb phrases. So survivals of child abuse tend to enter abusive relationships due to intrapsychic conflicts. And then the survivors of child abuse tend to enter, they're saying two different things. A case, participant, patient, subject. A case is a particular instance of a disease. A patient is a particular person. A research participant is a person with a particular characteristic or behavior. Try to avoid subject that is used often. Some people think it's kind of dehumanizing to refer to a person as a subject. So if you can, research participant, and a person is not a case either. So that's when referring to a person as a case, you should try to change that to a patient. And also, when you're referring to a patient with diabetes, I see a lot of times diabetes patient. You should always put the patient first. You should put the person before the disease because the disease is not the person. Compared to, compared with. One thing or person is compared with another, and compared to an entity is compared to another when a striking similarity is observed. So, compared with patients receiving routine medical care. You're comparing two things. Compose and comprise. Comprise means to be composed of. So the big thing will always come first when you use comprise. So the United States is comprised of 50 states. So that's how I remember it. So if you're saying the big thing first, the whole thing, you use comprise. If you say the little thing first, then compose comes after. So 50 states compose our nation.
In the previous, what about colloquial terms? I receive manuscripts frequently that describe a baby with this or that, or even worse, a babe with this or that.
You should use
Instead
infant.
of neonate,
Yeah.
infant,
Yeah, infant is actually 12, I think it's 12 months and under. So you should use, if it's 12 months and under, you should use infant, toddler for things older. But yeah, but you shouldn't say baby. because it doesn't, that's a huge range. I mean, could refer to a 4-year-old as a baby still. So you should say infant or toddler or newborn. So patients and cases are described. Only cases are reported. So you wouldn't say we reported a person, a 65-year-old man with. You would say we describe a 65-year-old man. Fewer for numbers and less for volume and mass. And cases are managed. Patients are not managed. Patients are cared for or treated. I know that one is used a lot. So these are just redundant words that you should try to avoid. That are seen quite a bit. Advanced planning, combined together, fellow colleagues. I italicized the one that you should delete, but for some reason the italics you can't really tell. Herein we describe, that is seen a lot. Future plans, major breakthrough, past history. So you should. Some helpful links. The AMA Manual of Style is actually online, so you don't need to buy the book. The International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, they have good guides for preparing a manuscript. The Academic Medicine Instruction for Authors and the Journal of Graduate Medical Education. I put the instructions for authors on there because I think those might be journals that that this group targets quite a bit. And then the Grammar Girl, just because it's good. So that's it.